Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a Thursday night football preview for opening night between the Lions and the Chiefs. It's been a long time since we've had football content, but just a few days away from the start of the season, and really I couldn't be more stoked to go ahead, dive on into the single game slate, and get you guys ready to make some of your lineups for your Draftkings exposure over there in GPPs. We'll go through some of the game scripts you might want to consider, some of the projections that are either real positive or real negative for players, and then of course the game theory angle of things to give you an idea of how to approach the slate, especially for large field tournaments. So a lot of info to go through, an entire player pool that we're going to touch on here. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. So we've got our projection sheet up here, and what we're going to start with is a general game script, right? Go through first off the total here, the line, of course, who's favored, and then talk about different types of ways to attack the slate, because we're going to go player by player. That's important, right? We need to know the pieces in play, but even more importantly is how you go ahead and play different combinations of players, right? When we're playing over in Draftkings, it is much more about the lineup construction, the correlation that we're going after, but really the players we're using themselves. And then on top of that, we've got the whole game theory aspect to consider, where especially in the large field contest with multiple 100,000 of entries to go out there and play against, you have to consider how you're going to beat, 200 to 300,000 other people, right? That's a whole feat along itself. So we'll talk about all that, but just to start it off with the general feeling here, we've got an extremely high total game, right? There in the mid 50s, I believe 54.5 points of last look. And really, you're going to see a lot of scoring here, right? Whether it's from the Chiefs going out there and torching the Lions, or the Lions themselves going out there and posting a decent score, right? They're a team last year that was in the top 15 of offensive efficiency in pretty much every single metric. They could run the ball last year. They had Jamal Williams for some of those goal line plays. Not so much this year. We'll talk about the running back situation, but even through the air, right? Jared Goff was a lot more respectable there in 2022 than we've seen for quite some time. So the Lions, there's a reason why they're in this spotlight here on Thursday Night Football. There's a lot of high expectations for them this year, right? As they get more acclimated to their offensive scheme, they've brought in a lot of good defensive pieces. They're going to have Jameson Williams towards the end of the year on offense, a piece that they didn't have for most of last year. So I do have a positive outlook on the Lions, but let's be real here. They're playing the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead. So I do think that this is going to be the Patty Mahomes show, and that's not a surprise, right? He's the best quarterback in all of football. That is not a hot take. And from the fantasy perspective, he's posted unreal numbers for the last 3 or 4 years. So you can look at my points projection, right? I've had him at 25.7 points. That is, on another level, right? If we had just a full slate for all the games this week, he's going to be the highest projected quarterback of anyone considering matchup here. So you really have all the things going for Patrick Mahomes here. Just top tier player, top tier matchup, high paced matchup against the Lions team over here. And then of course, he's got decent weapons out there too. So from the generalistic standpoint, everyone's going to be playing Mahomes, right? The Chiefs stack is going to be the most popular out there, whether it's going Mahomes and Kelce, a little bit more of an expensive pairing up there, or going perhaps, one of these two at captain, a little bit more balanced with some of the middle tier options on the Chiefs. Stacking 3, 4, maybe even 5 players on the Chiefs are going to be some of the more popular builds that you see. And if you're going to spend up for one of these players up top, I know that Mahomes and Kelce are both $12,000 plus here, but they're going to be the most popular options, right? Even in Amon-Ra St. Brown at $10,200, Jared Goff at $9,400. I know we don't have the ownership projections on here yet. They're going to be significantly lower owned, right, than their Chiefs counterparts. So just from the top level perspective, right, the prudent and probably the most popular play this week is going to be to take all of these elite tier Chiefs players and then punt down low with some Detroit Lions, right? So when we get down here to somebody like a Khalif Raymond or perhaps, a Josh Reynolds, right? They're going to be extremely popular, right? For that reason, because they fit the lineup construction of most of the field. So it's always good to start there to get a general idea of how most people are going to build, because you can do that, right? And definitely, like I said, I think the prudent play is going to be to take the Chiefs side, but you're going to have to do it a little bit uniquely, right? That game theory aspect, going out there trying to beat 100,000 or 200,000 other entries, not only trying to beat all of them, but also make sure you're not duplicating yourself with a ton of people when you do win those lineups, is more what we're going to focus on here. So, we'll talk about Mahomes being a great play. Like I said, the highest projected quarterback of anybody this week, but that is far less important than, some of the combinations that we're going to talk about. So the captain is going to be a key piece of our analysis here, but more than anything, it's important to have that as a baseline, right? Knowing that everyone's going to play the Chiefs. So with Mahomes, can you play him at captain? Absolutely, right? When he projects so much better than all the other top end options at the captain spot, or just even at flex, you could always use that kind of player, right? So I will say in large field GPPs, a lot of times quarterbacks aren't the optimal captain, or at least maybe are overexposed at captain for most slates. But if you wanted to use him, especially for a smaller field GPP or a cash lineup at the captain spot, you would have zero complaints on my end, right? He's projecting well better than the field. And I think other than the fact that he's going to be extremely high owned at captain, he's an excellent play there. Travis Kelce, same thing. The guy has an unreal optimal rate when it comes to the captain position. He is priced up here, so the $12,000 price tag I think is a little bit more prohibitive. So if I was in a single entry, that kind of lineup, I probably wouldn't play Kelce at captain, mostly just because he's 18 grand at that position. If anything, right, I'd spend the extra $300 and get to a Patrick Mahomes. So, we're not going to spend too much time on these two up top. I guess other than pointing out the fact that $12,000 price tags does bring a lot of opportunity cost. If you want to play these two up top and try and fit in a Jared Goff, we have to punt with 2, sometimes even 3 players for the rest of your lineup to make this kind of lineups work, right? Like an $800 Khalif Raymond is going to be like 80% owned, right? If you were to start with those 3 players, right? If you went Jared Goff and then the 2 studs on the Chiefs side, those lineups are almost all going to have Khalif Raymond, right? So the unfortunate part about the pricing is that it forces you into the same value plays, right? So we'll talk about a few options at the bare bones bottom of the board that you might be able to sneak in, right, to make that kind of lineup work outside of Khalif Raymond, who, if you're going to start with that kind of build, I mean, you got to leave some salary on the table, probably at least like $1,000, $1,500, maybe even $2,000 on the table to make that lineup work. Because like I said, everyone that starts with those 3 is going to take him, or at least, maybe spend up for a Josh Reynolds. The more intriguing options for GPPs are, of course, the Detroit Lions, right? The total in this game is in the mid, 50s in terms of points. They're only 6.5 point underdogs, so we're expecting, the Lions to go out there and at least be respectable from the offensive perspective. So Jared Goff at $9,400, I think, is almost a must play, regardless of format. It doesn't mean you have to lock them into every lineup, but if you're not getting exposure to a Jared Goff, a Patrick Mahomes, I think that's a grave mistake, right? I think you're getting a little bit too cute if you're going out there and fading them. So I'll be playing Goff at captain just like a Patrick Mahomes, and really I don't think you have to overthink it there, right? These quarterbacks, especially when they're $9,400 in a high total game, are almost always going to be optimal, or at least close to optimal, right? A piece that you can have get away with in large field GPPs. Realistically, he's got to throw like no touchdowns, right? Post like no yardage to go out there and not get there at $9,400, right? We're only talking about 6 players you're taking in one of these, builds for a large field GPP. I don't want to say it's impossible for Jared Goff not to get there in this kind of game script, especially if you think the Chiefs are going to play well, right? If Jared Goff is playing from behind, they're almost certainly going to be throwing the ball early and often. I find it very hard not to play a Jared Goff in a Chiefs kind of stack. So that's why playing both Mahomes and Kelce together, especially if you took one of the 2 at captain, is extremely difficult to get done, but it is probably the optimal move. If you get to Gibbs here, rookie running back, if you get to Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're going to be extremely different because of how many people are going to prioritize, a Goff, Kelce, and Mahomes. It means that somebody like Amon-Ra, right, who's dealing with a little injury concern, you can see I have him on here as he should play. Coach Campbell came out a few days ago and said that Amon-Ra, is back to practicing, is in line to go out there and play for Thursday. Kadarius Toney, too, is worth noting, right, is also technically questionable right now, but Andy Reid came out and said that he'll be good good to go for Thursday. So Tony, I have no concerns about injury-wise. Amon-Ra, maybe a little bit more concerned, but the fact that he's practicing fully now has me thinking that he'll be out there. So if you're looking to get different for GPPs, and really you can play chalk at the other 4 or 5 spots. If you were to take these kind of players, play an Amon-Ra, right? Play a Gibbs, who I think will get some ownership, right? Same thing with Amon-Ra, right? It's not like they're going to be single-digit owned or even close to that by any means, but comparatively speaking, right, compared to a Kelce, Mahomes, Jared Goff, they're going to be like half or maybe even a third of the ownership as some of the options around them. So those are your differentiation options. Kadarius Toney, I think that if he gets fully cleared for snaps, if we hear that he's going to be one of the starters out there, becomes really intriguing. But $7 grand, considering that he might be a little bit limited, also considering that Sky Moore has reportedly been named the #1 wide receiver, Marcus Valdes-Scantling is also listed as a starter, means that Toney might not get all the snaps I was hoping for, right? And that are implied with the $7,000 price tag. So we'll have to keep an eye on Toney here. If on Wednesday he ends up being extremely low owned, right, because people share that same sentiment where they're like, okay, it's MVS and Sky Moore, then I'll play Kadarius Toney, right? He played a huge role in their playoff run last year. He played a huge role in the Super Bowl last year. So to say that he's not going to be involved whatsoever, I think would be a huge mistake, right? And I know the price tag's not ideal, but kind of like an Amon-Ra or a Gibbs here, I think he's going to be a piece of leverage that you might be potentially able to get to. So again, ownership projections, player pool, by the way, guys, the tabs over here on the right, they're going to be posted on my Patreon page. So just made an update over there. I have everything split up based on sport now and based on the kind of content you're looking for. So whether you're somebody that plays golf and football, that plays DFS or props for either sport, there's a tier for you out there. So if you're looking for my player pool, my projections, all of these as they change throughout the week, make sure to check out the Patreon. There's a link in the description of the video. It's where you can see my player pool compared to what you're doing for any given week, and use it as a reference point, right? You don't have to tail everything that I'm doing. That's not the purpose of my Patreon. It's more to be a research, projection source, first off, but second off, also something that you can reference, right? You can be like, oh, I think that, let's say that you really think that Richie James, right, could be, a little sleeper pick to look at. And I do think that this week, by the way. You can see, oh, is Luke on Richie James this week, right? Is he going to be playing him in his large field GPPs? I'm going to get an idea if I'm in line with you, right? So there's the Discord server. You have all the projections posted on there for NFL. So if you join the DFS tier, you'll have access to all of the spreadsheets, both for Showdown and main slate all week. And if you join the prop tier, I'm also posting props, slips, all that sort of fun stuff, analysis for all the different games throughout the week too. So there's an NFL tier, there's a prop tier, there's a fantasy tier, right, if you just want these spreadsheets, and of course all the golf content that I post there too. So check it out down below. It's a huge value and gives you access to everything that I'm working with from week to week. So in terms of these middle tier options, Pacheco is going to be owned, especially at just $6,800. I think that he's a clear middle tier option that you can get to. David Montgomery, perhaps a source of some leverage. Now, we haven't talked about the Lions stack yet, but I think this is a good time to do so, right? So I told you guys the popular, I think probably the smart option, right, is to go out there and take the Chiefs side. But if you're feeling a little frisky and you want to be a little gambler out there for this, the Lions could win this game, right? Let's not think that this is like a 3-touchdown spread, like what we have with college football, which, by the way, 3-touchdown spread for Colorado, how'd that work out, right, for week 1? It's week 1. It's unpredictable football. The Lions have made a lot of moves in the offseason that I think are going to improve their team, including what they've done at running back and on defense. So maybe they win this game. For whatever reason, somehow the Lions go into Arrowhead, right, and figure this thing out. I'm not telling you that's going to happen, right? I think the Chiefs roll here. But if that were to happen, David Montgomery becomes extremely intriguing, right? He's the guy in the red zone that I think is going to get the goal line touches. He's the player that might just get more rushes in total in the game, right, compared to Gibbs. People like the unknown with Gibbs. People also like the fact that Gibbs brings you receiving upside. But let's not think that David Montgomery can't catch balls out of the backfield, right? He's done so before, right? Especially over there in Chicago, and he's proven himself to be a touchdown scorer, right? An efficient runner as well. So if you think that the Lions might get a lead and can hold on to it for a little bit, if they're going to be a little bit more rush heavy as teams are when they're playing from ahead, then maybe Montgomery becomes even more intriguing, right? And I can tell you, because everyone wants to play Gibbs, I think somebody like David Montgomery maybe go a little bit overlooked, right? Maybe is that piece of leverage that you can get to. Marvin Jones, same thing. I think maybe better in Chiefs heavy scripts, right? Because, he fits one of those middle tier options. And then of course, Marvin Jones is a down the field type of wide receiver, right? He's a larger target. So maybe he gets a little bit more exposure if the Lions are playing from behind, but playing from ahead, right? I like the David Montgomerys. Jerick McKinnon is always a player you can get to from the Chiefs, brings a lot of receiving upside and breaks showdown slates unlike any other player. Like just out of nowhere, low ownership. When you don't play Jerick McKinnon, it's normally when he goes out there and he's scoring like 20 fantasy points. So believe it or not, he's somebody I'll play at captain, right? He's going to be extremely low owned at the captain spot, but like 5-7% of my lineups, I'll have him at captain, right? Because he breaks a slate every once in a while. He has a knack for that, right? If you've played Showdown over the last 2-3 years, you've probably noticed that. Marcus Valdes-Scantling is listed as a starter. He's going to be extremely popular this week. Projects pretty well from points per dollar perspective. Sky Moore might be your highest owned player on the slate, period, at $4,800. He's, I guess, technically their wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs. He's the only one that's been told that he's going to have an every down role for this team, at least at the wide receiver perspective. We know Travis Kelce, right? He's going to play pretty much every single snap, but he's $4,800, right? So everyone and anyone is going to play a Sky Moore. So if you're looking for differentiation down low, he's not that guy, right? But he's also an excellent play given how well he projects. Sam Laporta, you have the rookie tight end there. I think he's going to be, a decent receiving option for that team. So, I think it'll be moderately owned. Definitely somebody you could get to. Rashee Rice projects a little bit worse than a Sky Moore, right? Doesn't have that established role. In fact, might be the wide receiver 4 or 5 for this team, right? You've got another guy down here, Justin Ross, who fits that same description, where, if I'm going to take Kansas City wide receivers, I'm probably sticking to the MVSs, the Sky Moores of the world. Maybe up top, right? Obviously, Kelce, you can throw into that same conversation. Tony, right? I know he's a little expensive, but he's at least going to play, right? We know he's going to get some plays set up for him too, like you saw during the playoff run. I'm not too sure about Rice, right? Or somebody like a Justin Ross. So if you're talking about just a low-owned flyer, like maybe 5-7% of your lineups at very most, maybe you play one of those two, but I'd probably stick to one of the top 3. Kickers are always in play, especially in a high-scoring matchup. The defenses, you're probably hoping for a defensive touchdown. So if you're playing 150 lineups, you're probably playing the kickers and defenses. But if you're playing like a 20 max, I'd probably stick to the kickers. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a huge wild card, has gotten a lot of snaps with these starters during the preseason. So I've taken him in some best ball drafts, kind of using that narrative and hoping that it's legit. But that's speculative at the very best, right? I have him projected for 4 fantasy points, not very much. Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, if you're looking for chalk, it's these two guys. Everyone is going to play these two. Noah Gray's even going to be a little chalky. Richie James Jr., lump him in with a few of the other guys here, right? Justin Ross, you can throw him in there with the Rashee Rice. I think I like Richie James Jr. a little bit more because we know who he is, right? He played for the Giants, was pretty productive there with Daniel Jones, which is impressive, right? Considering how inefficient that offense has been over the last few seasons. A little bit better last year. I think it'll be a lot better this year for the Giants. But you can take a chance on a lot of the guys down here. I don't think it has to be a Khalif Raymond, right? Or Josh Reynolds. Especially in Raymond's case, he's like by far the highest projected player when it comes to points per dollar. Justin Watson too, you can see he's at 9x, but that's because he's only a $200 price tag. I'm going to play Khalif Raymond, right? But it has to be when I'm differentiating with the rest of my lineup, right? If Khalif Raymond's going to be 30 to 40% owned, like I think he will be, then you can't be using him with all chalk across the board, right? Spending all of your salary using a chalk lineup construction like 4 Chiefs and 2 Lions, right? Like that's not going to work with Khalif Raymond down low. So I like him. I think he makes a lot of sense. He's going to get some, I'd say he's like the wide receiver 4 right behind a Marvin Jones. So let's see, who do you have ahead of him? Marvin Jones is ahead of him for sure. We know obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown's the number 1. I guess number 3 wide receiver. I guess would he be number 3? No, right? Because Josh Reynolds is going to get more playing time than somebody like a Khalif Raymond. So you're still talking about wide receiver 4. He's probably going to play like 25 to maybe 40% of the snaps. I'd say that Reynolds is probably going to play like 30 to 50% of snaps, right? So obviously that's why he's a little bit more expensive. Let's not act like he's 100% going to get there, right? And is like 30% snap share. Like that's just there's still a lot of unknown there. So taking somebody like the Richie James, who maybe scores in his one touch, is the Noah Grays of the world, right? I know they're a little bit more risky. You can throw Brock Wright in there too. I guess James Mitchell even, backup tight end down there for Detroit. Actually, he's third string tight end behind Brock Wright even. Any of those players end up getting a splash play. That's how you break a showdown slate. So if you're in a 150 max, like I'm still going to play Khalif Raymond this week, or I'm still going to play Josh Reynolds. You have to be exploring some of these other players. And I guess just to point out a few favorites, Noah Gray, right, backup tight end for Kansas City. He's always live to score a touchdown out of nowhere. Richie James Jr. we already mentioned. The chalky option, Khalif Raymond down there, but like Josh Reynolds, right? He plays more. I know he's more expensive than Khalif Raymond, but like just make it work with the rest of your lineup, right? Spend down from maybe an elite tier option to a mid tier option, and take Josh Reynolds, who'll be much lower owned, right, than Khalif Raymond. So that's how you can attack the slate. At $200, you could play Watson. I think he's like wide receiver 5 for Kansas City. But the thing is, he's an established veteran, so maybe he does get some snaps, especially because he's one of the better blockers on their team. So I think a lot of people don't realize that even though he's like some young rookie who's explosive, like a Tony, Richie James Jr., for example, he's also a big target who kind of fits a different role, especially in the red zone, and does a lot of blocking for the Chiefs. So we'll have to see if he's active, but if Justin Watson is, that'd be pretty sweet. Blake Bell, third string tight end, you could even consider, like, just especially if you're playing 150 lineups, right? Take risks in a few of your lineups down here, right? And it doesn't have to be a whole lot. When one of these guys down here, let's say like Justin Watson might be like 0.5% owned, hell, you use them in 3 to 5 lineups, and you're way, way over the field in terms of your exposure. So, like I said, we went through the entire player pool here. We went through some of my favorite options. It's much more about how you play the players, not so much who you're playing here, right? Like I said, take a lot of the Chiefs players, right? They're probably going to win this game, but pair them up with some of the, lower owned, high upside options down low. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the first Thursday night football preview of the year. We'll have some main slate content dropping throughout the week. Of course, guys, I do all kinds of showdown content for Sunday night football and Monday night football, so keep an eye out for those videos. And for all of the content that I'm posting, make sure to join the Patreon page like I was mentioning before. On there, you can get access to all the spreadsheets that I'm putting together for all the different games throughout the week, all of my prop content that I'm posting, and if you're a golf junkie like myself, you can check out everything I do for that side as well. We don't have a golf tournament for a week or so here, just some Euro Tour, some LPGA stuff that I've been posting props for, but the season will be back in full tilt in just a week and a half there. So if you're a big golf football guy like myself, well, you came to the right place, the right channel here. I appreciate all the support, guys. Looking forward to an epic season here in 2023. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of the content when it drops. And let's go out there and have ourselves a profitable start to the year.